7 o'clock, I will call a meeting of the Winona County Planning Commission to order, and we'll begin with the flag pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, is everybody okay with the agenda? If so, I would like a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Mark, so moved.
Second.
Pat seconded it. All those in favor of the agenda as written, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The agenda is approved. Okay, did everybody get a chance to look over the minutes? Did they find any discrepancies or things they question or errors or any comments?
I move to approve.
Steve moves to approve the minutes.
Second.
Vince seconded it. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The minutes are approved as written. Okay, at this time, we will go to the petitions. Docket PC 8-815, -19-01. The petition of Mike Sherman in regards to the following conditional use permit. Staff, you're first.
Thank you. Yeah, so this petition also had a variance request for a new dwelling on prime soils this morning that was passed, I guess, just to fill everyone in. And now they're going for the second part of that is the conditional use for a new house on less than 40 acres. And I believe it's in like the 5 to 8 acre range is what the new parcel is going to be. But we'll kind of see from their site plan drawing there, you can kind of see that they're planning the property line to kind of follow that dry run that runs through there. So Eric had the blue line on there that kind of indicates where the dry run is. That's actually not a stream, it's a dry run. And then the house would be out in here. So it kind of is a natural divide for the property line. And as you'll see when we go through here in a little bit, Eric actually had a survey from the 80s too, where this has kind of been, in the works, where something that they've been thinking about is splitting that area as a buildable site. For quite some time. But then on the right there, you can see where the prime soils are. So it's actually class 1 soils that are currently in row crop. But I guess that doesn't really apply to this one other than that we're looking at the less than 40 part of that. But the prime soil stuff is there for your reference. And once again, yeah, and it's 76% of what the proposed parcel is going to be is what Eric came up with when he measured that. And then there are some, so the 1984 floodplain does cover some of the area here. So the dark blue is the 100-year floodplain, and then this lighter blue is the 500-year. But being that that's the old data, and we do have the new data preliminarily available, the next slide is that, and it kind of just shows what the revised floodplain will be with the new LiDAR data. So this is much more accurate and a much better representation of what the actual floodplain will look like. So you can see, now we're quite a ways away from where the proposed dwelling would be, and there's plenty of separation. But they would probably still, until we adopt the new maps, they'd be liable to pay for flood insurance. And then and there's also some high arc probability on the site, so at least a phase 1 archaeological study will probably be needed before construction could begin. And then Eric has 2 videos here that he took that have volume for you. So
we are in section 9 of Homer Township, and this is in regards to both a planning commission and a board of adjustment agenda item, whereas the petitioner Mike Sherman seeks to allow a variance to allow a building site on a type 1 soil instead of the required type 4 through 7, and also to allow a new building site on less than 40 acres on a 5-acre proposed building site. We're currently just standing off of the existing driveway located at 23518 County Road 15. And this is the existing driveway to Mr. Sherman's existing building and residence. You can see the new house essentially sets up right in that area. The current zoning district for this property is RH, Rural Heritage, and it's approximately, I think, 85 acres or so. And the reason why that it's in the RH district is mainly because of the position of at least one of the existing structures that's on the slope or the hill in that area. And in that regards, the balance of the property is zoned agricultural resource. Currently looking at that field that the building site would be located within this area here. And it's approximately 5 acres, and you can see currently there is a crop of corn that is basically being grown here. So it does show evidence of being in production and tilled in recent history here. You can see there is a drainage area just off of the driveway in this location here. Go through there. And this would be the southmost part of the parcel. If a new parcel was to be split off, it would be somewhere brought down to this area and then back over this way. Shoot some more video footage. That's probably a little bit further to the northwest of the parcel or on the other side. Okay, we're about 250 feet north of where we were just standing on the driveway. And you can see we have a marker roughly in this area that's representative of where a new driveway could be constructed off of County Road 15. Again, this would require a access or driveway permit from the Winona County Highway Department. And again, we are looking at the approximate 5-acre field with this year's corn crop on it. This would be the view looking back to the east, kind of panning to the north and to the west of the surrounding area. Just as far as existing agricultural enterprises in this valley, coming from Highway 61 and traveling south, I believe there is a horse farm, about 1.5 miles in that direction. And then there is a Homer Township road that goes back to the southwest. And within that property, I believe there is an elk farm, and there's also a beef cattle farm that is more than a 1/4 mile to the west. And there's also the nearest, as far as looking at the type of cropping, there's just some pasture land in that area. And this is, I think, about the only field of corn that I had seen as you're traveling along County Road 15. I believe back in Homer Valley, there's a small remnant part of some corn being grown way back in there. But as far as row cropping, just wanted to point out just how limited or sparse it is. As you're traveling south, and this road takes you up to the ridge top onto Homer Ridge, it changes quite more to agricultural land and dairy operations and animal and row cropping as you get south more into Homer Township. But this should conclude the video footage for both the conditional use permit and variance application.
Yeah, so I guess if you have any questions for me, I'll be here, but that's kind of what we're looking at. Yeah.
What do we get to, what was the variance that got approved?
So the variance was approved for a dwelling on prime soils. So more than 40% of the parcel is prime soils, and the structure is going to be located on top of a class 1 soil. So that's what they approved today at the meeting.
So that has nothing to do with what we discuss here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, really what you're looking at is a new dwelling on less than 40 acres for this part of it. You know, his application was 2-part, and that's why he had to attend both meetings. But yeah, I don't, maybe Kay or Lou or Stephanie could correct me, but I don't believe that's really supposed to be a major part of this conversation.
It just relates to criteria number 4, which talks about the proposed lot consisting of prime soils. So that criteria is not met, but because of the variance, it's not as big of a deal at this point.
Okay, then my next question is the entire property 6.15 acres total?
No, so the entire property currently is at 85 acres, and they're looking at like a 6 or 7 acre split off of that around that existing dry run. So they're kind of going to use that dry run that comes kind of through the wooded part of the parcel here, approximately, to kind of split the majority of the acreage off, I believe, from what's down here.
And is there no other building site on the other acres?
So on the other side, this would all be pretty steep wooded bluffland and stuff. So, I don't know, I guess maybe that's a better question for the property owner. He's a lot more familiar, and Eric's the one who was out on site and took that video, but I do know that, you know, this is the area that he looked at, and it is flat, out of the floodplain, and right off the road. And I know he mentioned that having a shorter driveway was a part of that consideration. So if they were to look further back away from the prime soils, you'd be looking at adding, you know, a pretty significant driveway and quite a bit of earthwork to do something like that, so.
And maintenance, and, I think they were looking at the separation of the parcel, just the natural, the way that it would separate, with the split, and survey, so.
Okay, is anyone else? Kay?
Oh, just to piggyback on what Blake was talking about, of the entire 84 acres, the county assessor's office only shows a total of 10 that are even considered tillable on the whole parcel.
But the county assessor doesn't consider how many acres on the whole parcel would be buildable, right?
No, they do not.
Okay. Any questions of anybody else on the planning commission? For Blake?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this time, would Mike like to address the commission as the property owner or the petitioner?
Ladies, gentlemen, as I explained earlier today, I'm just tired of a 500-foot driveway, and I would like to, being that I've got 85 acres, I certainly could build on a 40, but in doing so, I'd have a longer driveway than I've got already. So when I bought this place 18 years ago, it was full of saplings and had been neglected as any kind of agricultural land. So I brought in a cat, cleaned it up, and been using it as agricultural land ever since. But the total agricultural land there is only 8 acres. So you can understand that I'm not cutting into the good farmland of any sort to speak of. So my preference is to keep it close to the road, have a smaller, shorter driveway, and make it a little bit more practical. Any questions?
Anyone have, Steve?
What will happen with your existing house?
Sell it.
That's with the rest of the parcel, or?
Don't know yet. Got to find somebody that'd be interested in 5 acres with the existing house, or whether they'd want to buy the whole thing.
You have a question, Kelly? Mark?
Well, yeah, so if you sell that, then you may split off another house in 5 acres?
It's already split off on the 5 acres for my old
Oh,
house.
for the house, that's separate from the.
Right.
Okay, all righty.
No, I thought that the house, the existing house was on the 85 acres. That's not on the 85 acres. The existing
No.
house. Gotcha. Okay.
There any other questions for Mike? At this time? Oh, I suppose, I just forgot this, Mike. You're supposed to state your name and address for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike Sherman, Homer Valley, County Road 15.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, at this time, let's see, I gotta get back to here. I need a motion to open the public hearing for docket 8-15-19-01.
So moved.
Kelly moved and Vince seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of opening the public hearing for docket 8-15-19-01, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The public hearing for this docket is now open. Anyone wishing to speak may step forward, state your name and address, and say what you have to say. Now, we're kind of got a sparse audience here, so, but if there's a mouse, he can step forward too. Okay, for the second time, anyone wishing to speak to docket PC 8-15-19-01, please step forward, state your name and address. For the third and final time, anyone wishing to speak to docket 8-15-19-01, please step forward and state your name and speak your piece. Seeing no movement, do we have a motion?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
Steve moves to close the public hearing, and Mark seconds it. I presume there's no discussion. All those in favor of closing the public hearing for docket 8-15-19-01, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The public hearing is now closed on this docket. Is there any discussion or questions or anything at this time?
I would move that we recommend the petition for approval and accept the findings of staff and recommend along with the conditions that are listed by staff.
Well, we can't do it that fast, Kelly.
Why not?
Sure we can.
And if there's no disagreement with what's contained there, you can do just what you did.
I'll second it.
Okay, well, I have some disagreement.
Well, you're going to
That's
ask
what
for
discussion
discussion.
is for.
Okay, I would like to, you know, Mike, if whoever planted that corn hadn't done such a good job, I wouldn't have near as much of a problem. But that's about the best corn I've seen this year.
I'm hearing the same thing.
And that's what this ordinance is all about, is saving prime soils for agricultural use. And I realize it's a small chunk of land, but all these small chunks of land add up. And
Well, there'll still be corn there after I build. Because I'm going to feed the deer.
okay, well, don't spend that much money to get deer feed.
Okay.
Has anyone else got any comments? I guess I would like to go,
Mark, yes, well.
oh, Mark.
Well, I'm on the same page with you, but I drove up there the other day and went around and came back and, yeah, I would hope you just build a house and still have 4 acres of corn there or something, but, you know, it is basically a housing development area. I mean, it's like a house after house after house after, because that's what I saw, but I agree, that's some of the nicest corn in the county right there. And I hate to put a house where we have such good corn, but,
Okay, I have a question. You're done, Mike?
yes.
Okay, I have a question for council. Is it possible to build another house in this area?
It depends. The good lawyer answer, it really depends on what's being proposed.
Here,
Is that your intention or not?
What's my intention?
Are you gonna subdivide this 5 acres and have somebody else build another house there if that's passed?
Absolutely not. That's not my intention at all.
Okay. Is that,
So Eric's not here, huh? Because usually he would chime in with that, once the parent tract has been the 3rd time, that creates a subdivision, and subdivision regulations would apply.
Unless they can meet the 5 acres and 300 feet of road frontage, then subdivision stuff doesn't apply, even if it is a 3 split or 4 split.
But each time it's less than 40 acres, it would require a conditional use permit. So if there was another proposed dwelling there on less than 40 acres, they'd come back before you guys and have to ask for a conditional use permit. A small split would be, like Blake said, a parcel of less than 5 acres or with less than 300 feet of road frontage. You only get 2 of those per parent parcel.
Yeah. And there's 2.
I think this one meets the,
Yeah, this one meets it because it's over 5 acres and it has 300 feet of road.
So it's exempt from it, is what you're
yeah,
saying?
this one wouldn't count towards the those 2 splits.
It's not a small split.
But if they split it again, and the conditions were less than 5 acres, then obviously it would then trigger that standard.
But the record will show, will it not, that that is not the intention? That's not the stated
right?
intention of the landowner? So,
I totally get where you're coming from with wanting to protect the cropland. Sitting on the county board, I also care about driving the economy. And if we can put a house that's not out in the, if we're taking a 300 acre field or, you know, a prime farmland area and chopping that up, I'm gonna have a hard time with that. But if we're in a valley amongst other houses and we can share the tax burden, because this is gonna generate property taxes, there's no doubt about it. It's easier for me to support, you know, yeah, I wondered too what day the video was taken, because that corn looked just, it looks just,
It was beautiful. I was just up there Sunday.
no lack of nitrogen there, it's just as blue as
No,
it can be. And
That's my biggest concern is, you know, we've really got trouble with the corn crop because of the weather and soil compaction. And you should see some of the fields of corn I drove by on the way to this meeting tonight. And
when you purchased the original tract of land, was that cornfield there? So
no,
you
he said
made,
he grubbed it out.
With saplings,
okay, so
it was unplantable.
So there's a net gain since he's owned it in cropland over before he owned it, or they owned it. Which,
If you want, I can chop it up for silage.
No, that's not the
I
point.
get
Mike.
your point. I
Yeah.
get your point.
Yeah. All right, is there any other discussion about the findings of fact or the conditions? Well, I don't see a whole lot of hands being raised, so, all right. I presume that this ends the discussion on the motion to, council, would you read the motion?
That would be a motion to adopt the findings as presented, recommend approval of the conditional use permit with the conditions outlined by staff.
Okay, is that understood by all the members of the commission? Okay, at this time, I would say that all of those in favor of the motion as presented by council on docket dash 815-19-01, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion to recommend the adoption of this docket now goes to the county commissioners at whatever date they have set up. And so I take it you understand what that entails. And I was just told that our person from last month's meeting didn't show up, so they tabled that one, so show up.
When's that now?
I don't know. September 10th, I believe they said. See, we just, the planning commission can only recommend either approval or disapproval. It's now up to the county commissioners.
If there had been a dozen people who came to the podium and spoke that they don't want you to, they have a problem with it, it would be less likely that it would pass at the county board, but since it doesn't seem controversial, and
No.
it's again.
I don't think you
I
have
don't
to
think-
worry,
I
but
don't think you
that's,
have a problem, you never know, but.
that's the procedure. And we just want to make sure that you understand that so that we can get this thing carried on to completion. Okay? Thank you. All right, get back to my agenda. Item number 6 is review amendments to the Winona County zoning ordinance, chapter 5.5 for township acknowledgement forms for CUPs and IUPs. Lou, is that your ball?
Yeah, I'll take a whack at it.
All right.
We didn't have anything then? Okay. So last time we were here, if you remember, we had a discussion about the township acknowledgement forms and a couple sections of ordinance relating to notification of the, of townships and situations where a petition is on the border of two townships or multiple townships. The township had provided some guidance, and we had kind of keyed off that for the draft that we had presented to you. And through our discussion, you recommended a slight change to not require mailing or that the petitioner go to the meetings of the neighboring townships, but that there was just a mailing process that we kind of fit into our normal process for notification. Since then, we've made the changes to the draft that you had recommended. Kay went to a township officers meeting last night and informed them of the planning commission's desires and what was in the ordinance, and discussed that with them. They did not express any huge concerns. They had a couple questions, which Kay kind of just explained what the ordinance was going to entail, and they seemed satisfied with that type of notification. And so tonight we have the draft ordinance before you with those changes, and if everybody's comfortable with that, we can proceed to public hearing. So So we'd be looking for your guidance and possibly a motion to move to public hearing if that is what you desire.
I'll make a motion that we move to public hearing.
Second. Okay, Kelly made a motion to move to public hearing and Patrick seconded it. Is there any discussion? Now, we're all clear on what we're gonna have for the public hearing? I mean, as far as starting point,
Yeah,
okay? Any other comments?
sure. Mark and I are both at the meeting last night. Kate did a great job explaining it to the township officers, and I think Everett Rolfing was one of the kind of original people who had requested this, and I asked him specifically if this was meeting his intent, and he seemed to, he is happy with it. Everyone seemed happy with it, and it changes, the change from what they requested was simply they wanted each township to, the petitioner to have to get approval from each township, but we're simply notifying each township, and they seem to understand that, and that seems like a good approach, and the petitioner will only have to answer to one authority, their existing, or the township they live in, so I think it's a good solution to the problem that they brought forward, and should be non-controversial.
Now, excuse me, counsel, is there a chance that we could piggyback these two public hearings if we so agree, but we need a separate motion for each one?
That's correct. So, and the way it would probably work is that at the next planning commission meeting, you'd have a public hearing on this one, and then close that, do your thing, and then have a public hearing on the next one. So they'd be separate, but they could be heard on the same day.
Okay, that's understood by everybody. All right, then, all those in favor of, was it Kelly's motion to have a public hearing? Do you want that to be up to staff so that if we get swamped in next month's meeting, we don't have to stick
Yeah,
around?
I'll leave it up to staff as to when that needs to be scheduled.
At this point, we need to plan on it being on the 19th. The thing about this vote and initiating a public hearing is that's what starts triggering our timelines that our ordinance requires. So we have certain deadlines that will now have to be met. So we'll plan on it being on that September date unless something crazy happens, and then we'll have to figure out how to address our timelines.
Okay,
Okay?
Yep.
Is that agreeable?
yep.
All right, now, okay, all those in favor of the motion as we've discussed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, it's passed. We're going to have a public hearing at some point on zoning ordinance chapter 5.5. All right, number 7, review solar amendments to the Winona County zoning ordinance.
All right, so this agenda item, there's a memo with some information from the June meeting. At that meeting, you asked for more information on land values associated with solar, community solar gardens. We're looking for some legal advice for the easement / sky space section that we are proposing to remove. And you were looking for some more information on capacity of the service area. And so there's a little bit of information in the memo on each of those items. Just to start at the top, if it's okay with you, we'll start with land values. We can discuss that and move on to the next item. Essentially, we talked to the assessor's office on land values, and they said it was interesting to hear that they do not. This is from the Minnesota Department of Revenue from the state. Their guidance to the assessor's office is to not assess 1 megawatt or smaller solar arrays
any different than the ag land that's, that they sit on. Arrays larger than that, would get a full commercial assessment from the assessor's office, and that would include all, associated improvements like fencing, whatever else comes along with the improvements of the property, so. Roadways, yeah, and if you look at the 5 megawatt, array that's in Rolling Stone Township, there's a fairly significant, road upgrade that, went along with that, as well as, the fencing and, landscaping, and that sort of thing, and then it would get a commercial, assessment as well, so that would be quite a bit more than, an agricultural land, assessment, so.
Vince has a question.
Just to give us an idea, how many in area, in acres, would 1 megawatt typically cover?
Anywhere from, 8 to 11, it depends on the slopes, and, kind of landform that it sits on, but I think the ones that we've seen have been, generally around, 8 to 10, 11.
And then is there any provision for a cumulative problem where somebody builds one right next to somebody else?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I think they look at it per project, so, I suppose if a property owner had, one parcel that they've got a 1 megawatt on, and they've got another parcel with another 1 megawatt, I would assume, this is just an assumption, so we didn't ask the assessors this, specifically, but, they'd be separate parcels, and, I don't think that they would look at it, I wouldn't expect that they would look at it as a cumulative effect.
We did that down by Apple Blossom, right?
Yeah, we co-cited a couple of them, and in that case, they're on the same parcel, same project area, so I mean, those are 2 megawatts.
So they're,
I'm guessing, yeah, I would agree with Blake that they probably do look at those commercially.
so the ones that are on less than 1 acre, or 1 megawatt on 8 to 11 acres, that's probably some type of tax incentive, essentially, to not tax them commercially.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, they might be looking at it that way. I'm sure that they have to make a cut somewhere. They have to decide when to. They have to decide what the threshold is, and 1 megawatt is probably convenient for them at that point.
I guess my question is, if the one on Apple Blossom Drive is over 1 megawatt, so it'd be taxed commercially, the one you're talking about is in Rolling Stone Township, and Apple Blossom Drive is not in Rolling Stone Township, so how do you come up with just one in the county?
I didn't say that it was just one, did I?
It does say that on this page.
Oh. One, I see. Well, yeah, I mean, that's true. I guess I wasn't looking at it as the co-located ones. So,
Okay.
yeah, there are those 2 in off of Apple Blossom that, now that I think about it, are co-located, so they could be looking at it as 2 megawatts. Well, they are 2 megawatts on per parcel. So.
Mark?
Just kind of a comment. Last year during the legislative session in the cities, they tried to pass a bill that if you had, in one township, if you had more than 1 megawatt in the township, then they would take all of them and combine them and raise them in that higher bracket.
Sure.
But it
So
failed.
there's been some discussion though about those issues. So yeah, so the state's looking at it from a lot of different angles, and it sounds like they're debating how to kind of slice and dice it.
Because that's why they're doing this, where they'll just build these little ones all over the place.
And I don't know, what the discussion was around that, but you may be maybe right. I mean, it might be more of people are arguing that leaving it the way it is would be more of an incentive, to develop. And the guidance from the state could change. that doesn't take legislative, approval to change their guidance or the way they look at it necessarily. So. Any other discussion or questions for us on that item?
I guess, I don't know if it's for you, Lou, or Kay, but is Xcel Energy the only company in Winona County that's actively building or accessing, or whatever the term I want to use, taking on more than one megawatt solar projects, or?
My understanding is, and anybody jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Xcel is the only one that is required to accept energy from the community solar system, so.
Can you explain what that means?
That's why they're all going in off the Xcel grid for the community solar, is because they have to, if a developer goes through the process, they get approved for it, Xcel has to accept that energy. The co-ops don't have to, so a lot of the solar farms that are going in on the other co-ops and other grids are actually being developed by those co-ops as part of their energy mix and those utilities. The community solar legislation only pertained to Xcel, the Xcel grid. Is that, am I right about that?
They're and they have a hosted capacity in our area.
Right, and they're, yeah, exactly, so. Does that make sense?
It does. For example, my energy used to be Tri-County.
Yeah,
That's where I get my electricity.
that's where probably most of us get our electricity.
Is that right? Well, see, they're not required to accept energy from community solar gardens, so they don't have an incentive to do that. They don't have any reason.
It's the difference between accepting energy from private developers who are developing solar resources, like the community solar systems, and in like a Me Energy or a co-op a grid, they don't have to, they can, I mean, a developer could come forward to develop something and they could say, no, thank you. Xcel has to, look at their proposal, and if they meet the requirements, they have to allow that to go forward and connect to their grid. The smaller co-ops don't have to do that, although a lot of those are developing solar, but they're not part of the community solar program or legislation that the state passed.
Well, I understand what you said, but I'm confused now then. My energy doesn't have to have alternative energy sources for a certain percentage of their power like Xcel does?
That is my understanding, that they are not obligated to.
Does anybody else know anything different, or can they explain it to me? Mark?
Okay, I'm not even sure if this is true, but this is what I was told a long time ago. This Xcel thing has to do with spent nuclear power storage things. In order for Xcel to get a waiver for their nuclear storage, for their nuclear power plants, they had to agree to take this solar thing. That's what I was told like 5 years ago. So whether that's true or not, I can't tell you if it is or not, but that's the story I was told, that Xcel doesn't have a choice because of some deal they made with the government as far as spent nuclear fuel rods, and this was their give and take.
A lot of these agreements are negotiated through the, I don't know, I forget the name of the state agency, but yeah, they're negotiated, and I think they targeted Xcel because they're the largest utility in the state, right? So they could get quite a ways with just working with Excel.
Well, I'm glad that I'm getting close to retirement because I think I have found a real good source of worms. I think we're going to have a real can of worms here. All right, anything else, Lou, or any questions from the commissioners?
Any more information that you think you need on that subject?
Now, is all of the members here, did they read Arlie's letter because he couldn't be here?
And we're not quite to that point yet. I'll bring up Arlie's letter in a minute.
Okay, all right.
The next item is the solar easement and sky space provision, and we provided Minnesota Statute 500.30 and council's memo that was produced. I don't know, Stephanie, do you want to speak on that, or should we just see if there's questions?
If there's any questions, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. The recommendation is that the language be stricken as we proposed.
So you'll find in your packet, Minnesota Statute 500.3 as well as Stephanie's memo. And we'd be available and answer any questions on that, or if you'd like to discuss further. Again, our recommendation is to eliminate that section of the ordinance.
That's in there already?
As you'll find in the draft. Yeah, it's in there. There's a section in there that talks about sky space easements. It references the state statute or kind of borrows from state statute. Yeah, we don't, if you read the memo, it explains everything, but our proposal is to remove that section from the ordinance.
Okay.
But we have to comply with state statute.
The statute still, exists. It's a tool for property owners to take advantage of, but it is a civil matter between property owners. And it's somewhat problematic for the county to be involved from a legal standpoint.
And I think the other thing that was pointed out when we first talked about this is that language is not in the model statute or model ordinance, or any of the other jurisdictions' ordinances. It's unique to Winona County. It's not necessary. And it basically says, here's some guide, or here's what needs to happen, but it's a private issue between you guys, and we're not going to get involved even if it's a problem, which causes conflict because another area of our ordinance says we're going to enforce our ordinance, and then that area says we'll enforce our ordinance except for right here. So we remove it entirely. The laws still apply, it's just not our ordinance that it's somebody else's issue to deal with.
But that's an issue that we have to discuss at this public hearing, right?
It would be up for discussion at the public hearing. That's correct.
All right, everybody understands that? Okay, Lou.
All right. Next item on our memo is capacity of the XL service area. And there's some information there on capacity. I spoke with Mark Zweig from Sunrise Energy. It's a company that went through the CUP process down in for those sites off of Apple Blossom, and he's been helping us review this from a larger developer of solar perspective. And he gave me a little bit of information about capacity. We also have a map from Excel that gives you an idea of the existing capacity of lines. Where am I here? I'm losing my place.
It's on the back of Minnesota Statute 500.0.
So that gives you an idea of the existing capacity. And talking with Mark, he said that the bigger issue with capacity really is the substation capacity as opposed to the line itself. And he said that the Winona substation has, or this Winona segment of Excel's grid has just over 25 megawatts of capacity for distributive energy, which would be like solar. So there's quite a bit of capacity, but it's not concentrated in one area. It's dispersed throughout the entire grid in the area. So like an area like up in Mount Vernon Township, I was told has something like 1 megawatt or 2 megawatts left of capacity in that area. So obviously that 25 megawatts would be dispersed throughout the area. It wouldn't be concentrated in one area of the grid. So we have that information for you to consider.
Those numbers just don't make any sense to me. Because I'm seeing in the green areas, 751 megawatts. So where did you say 75 or 25?
25.
That's kilowatts,
That's
not
kilowatts, yeah.
Up to 1 megawatt.
And that's existing,
Gotcha, thank you.
that's,
They didn't say kilowatts, 2 megawatts, gotcha.
Okay.
that's the existing power lines, distribution lines.
This is what's there already?
That's what exists. And so my question to Mark was, I mean, if you're looking at something like up by Rolling Stone that has an existing distribution line of 1 to 250 kilowatts, obviously we just we have 5 megawatts coming online, and then up a little ways further we've got 4 more megawatts coming online. The existing lines can't handle that, and he said that usually that's where the interconnection agreement comes in with the developer and Excel, is that interconnection fees would probably pay for upgrades to that distribution line, and so they're able to. And what I've been told is not just the interconnection fees, but it's they can just require. If you want to do this, you're going to replace or upgrade the line.
Are the
Again, the
developers,
substation still has to be able to accommodate that.
are the developers willing to pay for that? Like the one at Waitoka, no, not, where was that one? Where was Andy's? Ridgeway. That one didn't go through because
Right.
the developers weren't willing to pay for the upgrade, right?
Yeah, and I think that I think that's exactly what happened. Is that Excel said, well, you'll be upgrading that line because we can't handle it at this point, and whatever that cost was more than that was economically feasible for the project.
So,
So in some cases, I mean, it depends on the upgrade and what the cost is for that.
well, yeah,
In some
and
cases, it's going to be probably.
there is no other solar lines there, so I guess, we got a double standard here, don't we?
I think it's just a variation. I mean, every circumstance and location is different. One section of the grid is going to take more possibly than another section of the grid, depending on what you're proposing. And, one area might have more capacity than another. I don't know. I mean, we don't know the details of that. And my understanding is that stuff's pretty, it's held pretty close. You can't get the information readily.
Right.
So like a lot of the information that I've been getting is secondhand through some of the developers, just sharing, things that they're aware of through their experience. So
Do we have any way to prevent that scenario from playing out again? I mean, that community was really put through the ringer.
it was.
And the taxpayer to a certain extent, because we had held a lot of meetings and spent a lot of time discussing that, and then for it to, I mean, I don't know whether it's the cart and the horse thing, or is that potential scenario, can that play out again, or do we have a handle on that, or?
I don't have a good answer. I think that, that it's our obligation to hear those applications as they come through and do exactly what we did. And as far as I know, there's no way for us to prevent that type of a scenario. So, I mean, that's kind of the game we play.
So that's that's kind of a thing between Xcel Energy and the petitioner, right? We have no control over their.
Excel's approval before we?
It actually works the reverse.
Yeah, it works the other way around, according to what they say, the developers say.
Until our process.
Mark is next.
No, that was just a question I had as well.
Okay.
Which way can you do it? And it has to go this way, correct? It has to be, because Xcel won't guarantee him a slot. Once we have the thing, then Xcel will go, okay, you're given that. But they must have an idea that there's room, or they wouldn't be, they must know that there's at least a chance of it,
Yeah, I think they do.
or they wouldn't be out there
and
doing that.
I don't know why that one ended up the way it did. It was right off the bat, right after it was one of the first applications that came through. So it could have been the developer not being savvy, being a little green. I don't know.
That was gonna be 5 megawatts, wasn't it?
That was going to be 5 megawatts. I think it's like the first couple of years that you could do up to 5 megawatts, and then after that first kind of window, it went down to only one megawatt. So now you can't do a 5 megawatt community solar project.
Vince, you got a question? Not anymore? Okay. Anything else, Lou?
Nothing on that item. So it's just that was kind of for information for you guys. So if you want to move on, we can go on to the next item, which is solar siting and agricultural preservation. It's kind of the big item. I did some research into agricultural preservation. There's not a ton of references out there to look at as far as what other jurisdictions have done to protect ag lands. They do a lot of they do a lot of this type of stuff through requiring vegetation and screening and pollinators underneath. There's a lot of examples of that to try to make it as palatable for an agricultural setting as possible. But I haven't found a lot of examples for actually limiting location of these types of developments on class 1, 2, 3 soils or prime soils. That said, a lot of the information out there is kind of to the economic benefit to the farmer. Like I have in the information here that it's a way for farmers to diversify their income and possibly allow them to stay on the land. So then that way it's a benefit. That said, there is some of these sites are right on some of the best farmland on the property. In our context, the flatter areas are and the ones closest to the road are what the solar developers are looking for, because that's the cheapest, that's going to be the most economical, they'll be able to maximize their profits. If they can avoid it, they're going to stay off the slope sites and which are the areas where there's less productive land. So we've had some examples though. The ones down on Apple Blossom, it's a little bit different context, but those were cited fairly decently on a kind of on the edges of the better land and on a slight slope, on fallow land in one case, in pasture. And then on some of the sites up in Mount Vernon, those are kind of smack dab in some of the better land. Although the Gibbs is kind of on that back slope where he actually made comments that it was he chose that and asked them to go there because that was an area that he was having trouble with erosion on, and he saw it as he didn't have to deal with it anymore. If he was going to put it somewhere, that would be a good place because it'd be all you know, vegetated, and he wouldn't have to farm it anymore. So, so in that case, it kind of worked out. So it's kind of, you know, each site is, you have to kind of evaluate on its own merit. And has different issues with it. But we can look at, there are, you know, I mean, we did it with dwellings, where we said no to anything that was on prime soils or class 1, 2, 3 soils. And I mean, I don't think there's anything that says that you could not do that if you chose to do that. We also, in that ordinance, we created an exemption where if you're on less than, for a dwelling, this is for a dwelling again, that if you're on less than, you can be on prime soils. It's kind of an exemption to the rule if the prime soils or class 1, 2, 3 soils make up less than 40% of the entire parcel. So in that way, we're saying, we're kind of recognizing that, you know, we're going to let you build on the prime soils if, you know, your entire property or this parcel is not primarily ag oriented, you know. So we're kind of giving a little bit of flexibility there for siting. And so I could see, you know, I mean, maybe, you know, looking at, you know, trying to push, you know, putting some language in place that encourages them to consider other sites other than prime soils or class 1, 2, 3 soils, however you want to split it up. But I think what we would be looking at for right now is we'd have to do quite a bit more. We have to do a bit more work at staff level to get to a point where we're presenting you with something. And I think we kind of need guidance as to how far does the Planning Commission want to go down that road. You know, do you want us to go, you know, very strict? Do you want us to be more of a encouragement, you know, language that maybe something that's part of a criteria that would be something that you would consider, but not be a hard and fast requirement. One thing to keep in mind that if you do put like, you know, like our prime soils requirement for dwellings, we hear a lot of variances to that, you know. So if you put something that's hard and fast in the ordinance like that, then you're in a position where, you know, we might be, you know, encouraging quite a few variances because it might be hard for developers to meet that standard. So.
Question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. You'd mentioned some discussion here on a less desirable site. Power companies don't like that because, you know, they want it close by and that type of thing. From that less desirable site, the transmission line, or whatever you want to call it, to the main, is that an exorbitant cost? Is that, or just kind of a false deal breaker? Or is it more the convenience end of it that they want it close? What?
I have no idea what the economics behind it would be. I think again that every site has its own economic portfolio, and you know, and some companies are probably have a narrower window where something like that might make or break a project, whereas another one, you know, they might be able to more easily go further on a certain site. It kind of depends on what their financing is, and you know, are they spending a lot more on interconnection agreements than on another site that they might have hidden costs that we're not aware of, that are that something like this might prevent it. Then again, you know, they may not, you know, and they might be able to go, you know, do quite a bit more for us. And I think that's something that's just an unknown that we'll never know from one project to the next, you know.
Property owner too can say, well, you know, I'd like it further back to save this part of the land for a farming use or another use, but, so see if it pencils out with a lot longer road. Then they find out, does it or doesn't it? How much does it affect the rent that they're willing to pay for, you know, the long-term lease, so.
It's dynamic, I think. And it's hard to say that it's just like this or not. I think it really depends.
Is there any studies going on related to this from your?
Not that I'm aware of.
Aware of? Okay.
There may be, you know, some economic studies out there, but I'm not aware of them.
I remember on the Speltz, Jim Speltz application, that he had originally proposed them on less productive land but because of our steep slope ordinance, we had to keep the solar structures off the steep area, and he had to push them out into the center of the farm. And to me, that totally made no sense. And I still feel like, what's wrong with putting solar arrays on steep slopes?
I totally agree. And my personal comment about how tough we want to make it, I think from the evidence I've seen as a member of the Planning Commission in regards to prime soils for houses, if we don't make it extremely tough, we might as well not say anything, because we have given these people a CUP or a variance just about every time anyway. So, you know, it's just more pages of worthlessness. And we've got plenty in that 300 pages.
Well, you make a comment with what Commissioner Jacob stated for the tax base, you know. I can see your point, Gene, on that one, but.
Well, yeah, I realize that we have to consider both options, but in this case, particularly with the larger ones, if we could do like Steve suggested and make a commercial solar garden on a steep slope, which I'm pretty sure if they put the vegetation in there right, isn't going to wash, we'd be increasing the tax base and saving prime soil. And I think that's my objective.
Mr. Chair, is that steep slope prohibition part of bluff protection or something? Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Yep, it's, we look at the solar array as a structure, and, well, the bluff ordinance does not allow structures within the toe on the top of the bluff. So we've been applying the bluff setback to solar.
Well, I can
solar
understand the bluff setback, but I can't understand on the side of the slope if it's the right angle.
So all the arguments for people who don't want to see a house on the bluff, they're going to have the same argument with, if I don't want to see a house, I probably don't want to see a solar panel.
Yeah, I did also receive some guidance just this week. It's not in your packet, but from the DNR about shoreland and considerations for siting solar power facilities in shoreland areas. That's something I can forward along to you, but essentially they're talking about options for siting. I thought it was kind of applicable to what we were talking about as well. Talking about natural resource impacts. Considerations and options. So they're talking about, well, you could require a CUP. Well, we already do. Communities should explore available options for regulating these facilities. So they're interested in encouraging people, jurisdictions to look at the issue. Option one was allow with a CUP. Option two, prohibit in areas of potential significant impact. And then three, prohibit in all shoreline. So they're giving different options for regulating it and saying, you know, maybe you may want to consider just prohibiting it in shoreland areas. It's really comes down to what the county values and what you want to place value on. You know, so are you going to value those blufflands and shoreland areas, or shoreland areas, or bluffland areas when it comes to solar, or would you value the solar resource over top of that? So, and you can then look at making exemptions to the bluff ordinance. So,
I feel like when it comes to protecting farmland, one of the differences between the solar panels and approving a dwelling is that a 1 megawatt, 8 to 11 acres, you know, and this house that we just approved tonight, he might only take 1 or 2 acres out of production. And, just because his parcel is 5 acres, doesn't mean he still can't farm where his house doesn't sit. So, it just seems like there's a little bit, each megawatt has the potential to take a lot of acres.
Mr. Chair,
Along those lines, just real quick, Kelly, just to give you some context with that, some background. If we're assuming that 25 megawatt number is right, that we have that much capacity, you're looking at 250 acres throughout the county, so.
except that, the difference between there is a difference between a dwelling and a structure like a solar farm, which isn't permanently taking the farmland out of production. The life of a solar farm is like 35 years. A structure is permanent. So there is a difference there. I don't disagree that we want to protect farmland, but there is a difference there.
Mark?
There is, you might say it's 8 to 10 acres or whatever. That's the solar thing, but no, they also take a lot more land than that with roads, with running new lines in.
They can potentially.
Well, they do.
I'm talking about the project boundary.
Actually see when the project is done, the amount of land that's taken out of production is.
Well, it depends on how far you're pushing them off, the road. If you got something right up against the road, I think that like, is it the Mish, up in
Yep.
Mish? That one's gonna be pretty close to that, 10 to 12 acre mark. And, if you're looking at like the one, the car solar arrays down in, Apple Blossom, where they had the road, they kind of zipped along the field, and, you've got a couple more acres there. So.
When it comes to protecting farmland, I understand the community's desire to protect farmland, but when we permit something, we're not forcing anyone to take, if you want to protect your farmland, you still have every right to not take it out of production. So when we permit something, it's all willing participation.
I guess I agree, but in the case of agricultural land, if I own the land and I want to put the land in CRP, if I own the land and rent it out, and I want to put the land in CRP, I have to get the renter of the land to sign off before I can apply for CRP, because he has the option of saying no because he owns the right to keep that land in agriculture production.
Guess that's news to me.
Well, it happened with me.
The renter can stop the owner from.
If he says that he doesn't want you to put it in CRP so he can't farm it, you as a landowner cannot go up to the Farm Service Agency and get it in CRP.
Don't you have the right as a landowner to say, I'm terminating my contract with you this year?
Not this year. You can refuse to give him a contract next year, but you can't do it this year.
Then you have to run it like 2 or 3 years, or 1 or 2 years after that.
Yeah.
You have to run it yourself or different.
So
To get out of that rule.
I've
never heard that before.
It's the truth.
Well, I guess,
What's that do to the pricing then? I mean, can you adjust the price or? If you want to put it in CRP and you just tell the farmer, well, it's going from 200 an acre to 600 an acre next year. I mean, do you have the right to do that then? I mean, then you won't want to farm it.
well, we're getting a little bit off track, aren't we?
Yeah.
That was a relevant point, but I guess, you know, according to our comprehensive land use plan, we value ag land, we value bluff land, and we value shoreland. So can't we just, you know, honor those values in our ordinance for everything, including solar?
You could, but there wouldn't be a lot of space left to site the array. I mean, there are some areas in the county that, you know, are flat and aren't prime soils, you know, but,
I mean, with prime, I guess, with prime soil, you know, we grade the soil, right? Can we put similar ratings on shoreland and bluffs?
yeah, I mean, you can cut it in different ways. I guess I'm looking for, you know, guidance from you all as to, you know, what, how you would like to proceed with that. How far, in kind of what ways he might want to do that, or at least give me some, you know, some sort of an idea of, you know, how far to go, and what you might want to see ideally.
Well, I think another consideration that we haven't discussed here is what percentage of Winona County is actually in Xcel Energy's jurisdiction. I think it's a very small percentage, and so in that
map, it gives you an idea.
in that percentage,
Which map?
It's probably this one.
This
The
one?
capacity. solar
we
capacity.
are actually this
Most of it, I think, is Me Energy and
right.
Dairyland. Would that be right?
Well, Dairyland
Me-
is in conjunction with
Dairyland.
My Energy, but My Energy is almost everything except along the river, except in the northwest corner, right? That's Xcel's territory. Like,
Where, I mean, can you show us
and
where on this
Winona,
map?
of course.
That, I mean, that said, I mean, I know the My Energy is looking at, you know, I heard that they were looking at something in Utica or around Utica. So, I mean, they could go and, you know, develop their own solar array, you know, and if it was in county land use jurisdiction, I think, you know, that would fall under our purview. So this ordinance would, you know, pertain to that.
Sure. But they're just not seeing as many with My Energy because it's not as lucrative, or it's not required of them. And it's not as lucrative for the developers, actually.
Vince,
One thing, as we discuss it, these aren't houses. At some point when they're decommissioned, they would be ag land again.
Correct.
And that's something I always want to keep in the back of my mind. I would rather not see good cropland go for anything other than good cropland, but if there's marginal land, I feel like this would have an advantage. I didn't realize that they were all 10 acres, those ones, but
well, I don't argue about the marginal land, but
the other
I
thing.
think what Arlie is talking about is primarily prime ag land.
Yeah, and we didn't bring up Arlie's email. Did you guys all get that in your packets?
Yes.
Arlie just did send some information that I want to draw your attention to. And
It also seems though as we're at a disadvantage to Xcel because they know their secret capacity, as I understand it. And it seems as though people are going to rush to be first in line because that's going to dictate who gets to use up that capacity. And if I were a developer or a citizen or anybody, I'd feel quite resentful about that, the way that plays out, you know, go through the whole process and they say, nope, no capacity there. So I feel as though there's going to be a rush in the near future, because people that want to do it for an economic reason are going to want to get there, be first in line to use up the capacity.
I think that the capacity will probably be used up by the time we get this ordinance changed.
I'm probably gonna agree with that right there.
I think I was also told that big rush came when I think there was tax credits that expired now. So that's likely to put a damper on how many are going forward as well. So, the big rush we might be past the big rush just because those tax credits are no longer in place.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
But now you talked about Arlie and what he's talking about, and I'm real familiar. I drove right by it 5 times today. And yeah, if you go back 250, 300 feet, you're in a pasture.
Yeah, much better.
Much better. Even if you needed 10 acres, you could square it off and take 1 or 2 tillable acres and still have a nice site.
And have it away from the road.
And have it away from the road. And I want to get to that yet too, because we were told that there's no reflection off of these things and I want to show some people that there might be just a little bit of that.
Sure.
That's up next. I know that. I'm getting anxious here.
All right, let's continue, Lou.
Well, I don't really have much more for you. I mean, I think that was a good segue, Mark, talking about, I guess that is good guidance. What you're talking about is to push it off to the edges. So you might be using, with the 10-acre site, you might be using some, better, more productive land, but you're also taking advantage of the pastures that are on the fringe or on the edge of the field. And that's really, in my mind, I guess, that's what I like, that when ordinances don't say, you can't do this at all, but we're going to encourage it through the way we write it to move them kind of to the edge, so it's not quite as obtrusive.
Well, can we do that without an ordinance? Or without changing the ordinance? Like, Steve and were we the only two that were on when Corner had that project over at Ridgeway? We insisted that we wouldn't give them a CUP. You were on there too, Chris. Unless they moved that washing facility back away from the school and so they eventually agreed to put it in the open part of the quarry. Can we do a similar thing without having, as a planning commission, recommend that they don't site it along the road and don't site it in prime land?
I think you could. I mean, if that was something that you wanted to, push.
Mr. Chair, I don't feel as comfortable with that, only because we're not always going to be on the planning commission, and he's not always going to be in planning and zoning, and so I think it's always better to actually have something in writing, even if it's only just guidance. And it will also allow developers, to be able to see, okay, well, I'm probably not going to get that site, so I'm going to have to move it out to the edge. I mean, it's better for them to be able to see what guidelines they're working within.
I agree. You don't want to pop that on the developer at the meeting if you don't have to. It's better to have it clear and upfront, so they know what they're getting into, and they don't have to go into a meeting and be like, I don't know what's going to get thrown at me here. So you want to minimize that as much as possible. And then I guess back to with the planning commission and kind of negotiating on the fly. The current criteria that you have to work with doesn't mention. It's not like the house on less than 40, where it actually has one of the criteria is this on prime soils? Is it has the land been farmed for more than 10 years or less than 10 years? We don't have any of those criteria. It's really pretty broad, so we're looking at those basic, 5 or 6 criteria that are in there, and they're looking at, does it meet the purpose of the zoning ordinance? Does it meet the comprehensive plan? Does it, So, I mean, you could still, hang your hat on one of those criteria, but it's just not as, if you're talking specifically about, prime soils, it's just not as strong of a criteria, than it could be.
Well, could we just add that into the mix, that criteria? Would that
I
help?
don't care. That but I think that, you know, when we had the silica sand debate, we were told that as much as some people didn't like it, we as planning commission members could do whatever we wanted to. And then, of course, we have to just recommend our recommendations, and then the county board, they can do whatever they want to do.
Kinda, yeah. We would be looking for some guidance, and then we'd go back and try to draft an ordinance that would meet the letter of the law that could be defensible. So.
Well, yeah, I realize we got to do that too, but
Yep.
Steve, you have a comment?
So, I guess something that I kind of struggle with, and it gets brought up on, I'll bring it up on other applications too, is it needs to be the applicant's application. I mean, they can come in and we can say, well, we think it should be completely over here on the other side of the farm. There should be some way for that applicant to know before they come here that we're gonna just totally change, you know, we want to, you got 300 acres, we want it over on this 150 instead of that. I mean, there has to be some way for staff to work with the applicant and understand where we're gonna come from, so it's not a.
I agree. It's preferable to have it pinned down so they know what they're getting into, and there's can be a level
It should be up to us not to manipulate it, but to either approve it or recommend denial. I mean, by the time it gets to us, it's not our application, it's their application.
So would it help what you described, would it help that to happen if we were to add in a guideline for prime soils? Would that help? Add in a guideline for prime soils and a guideline that it be on the edges, or however you want to frame that?
I mean, if that's the general guidance that you guys would like to see that stuff kind of pushed more in those kinds of areas, I think, you know, us as staff can get together and brainstorm, see what that might look like, and maybe come back with something for you guys to consider.
What do you guys think?
Well, each parcels is
Different. Right.
So, you know, what's
The
along
edge
the road
might
and
not-
edge might be
Right.
the steeper stuff, and then when you get back, that might be the prime soil,
Right.
the nicest.
So one thing we can.
I'm just talking specifically on the one, you know, up the road there from us.
Sure. Well, so one thing we can agree on is prime soil though, right?
Right.
I mean, can we all kind of agree on that one? So that's one thing we can go with. I don't know I don't know what criterion you can put in place to achieve what
I
you're
think
looking at.
What staff was getting at then is if we say prohibit, you know, essentially prohibit them on prime soils, that's a really hard and fast. You're gonna have a lot of you're gonna have people asking for variances on it, you know. If the layout kind of, the solar array would like clip one corner of prime soils in order to use that old pasture or whatever, I mean, there needs to be a little.
Thought put into that one.
Be careful.
I'm not suggesting, I mean, what I'm suggesting is that we have a finding, just like we have in houses, that the prime soil finding.
You want like
And that's not a prohibition.
criteria.
We
That-
do have something similar when it comes to the wind energy systems. So that is an option where we can go to something similar, where if it's going to be the alternative energy, we can have criteria for a conditional / interim use permit if there's additional things you want findings on.
Okay, Vince, do you have a comment?
I
or
was
question?
wondering, can we state the preference for applications that utilize non-prime soil would be? That would be our first preference. Approval, you wouldn't have to say it's that black and white, like Mark was saying, every
Right,
plat is going to be different.
exactly.
But we would like to see it, it's hard for me to believe that running a line another 100 feet would make it prohibitive for somebody to move it back
Right.
into something that people refer to as scrubland or pasture or whatever. But if the applicant knew that the first preference would be given to people that were cognizant of the value of the prime soil, would move it back.
Yep, yep.
Stephanie?
I think what you're describing is essentially what having a finding or a criteria would do.
Yep.
Because if you have a whole bunch of them that aren't met, then you can essentially deny the permit. If that's the only one there, then everything else would outweigh it. So maybe it's not as favorable because it's on the prime soils, but everything else says that you should grant it anyway, so you grant it anyway. And you can discuss how much weight to give that particular petition, the prime soils issue.
And it would also make the petitioner, the applicant, address that criteria and, you know, provide information for how they are meeting that, that idea. You know, how are they conserving farmland as much as they can, or prime soils as much as possible? So that would make them address that in the process.
I have a question.
There is some benefit to that.
Would the prime soils condition, or not condition, finding, have solved this thing where they could have moved it 100 feet? I mean, was it prime, moving it off of prime soil?
If that's prime soil, I'm pretty
Well,
sure
productive
that's-
ag land is what you were talking about,
yes,
right?
but this is very, very productive
So,
land. And that's-
so that probably will handle even that situation.
Could be.
So-
I haven't seen a prime, I mean, you'd have to, you know, when you start talking prime soils, that's different than highly productive ag land. Prime soils is a classification, and I would have to look on it on a map to see if that qualified or not.
We'd probably use soil, again, I mean, whatever we did, we'd probably use something based on the soil survey. And, you know, is it class 1 and 2 soils, which are the most productive, or do we add 3 in as well? You know, and we can provide some mapping exhibits for you to look at and see what that looks like, and maybe a little bit of a couple of options, you know, and come back and present that to you. Continue the conversation and maybe get a little bit closer to something that might work for what you're looking for.
Okay, any more?
If you're done, then I'm done.
We have one more little part of that, and I'll do that part.
Okay, go ahead.
So the rest of the memo basically, from Linda from the Planning and Environmental Services Department states that we would add language much like Planning Commission member Clark and Commissioner Jacob and the rest of the Planning Commission has been discussing. Instead of adding them maybe as conditions, we start codifying and standardizing certain things, like the 300-foot setback, like the letter of credit and bond that we talked about a few months back, and the decommissioning plan and stormwater and erosion control plan. I just wanted to give you a quick example. Let's see here if I can do it so it's not upside down. Oh, what are we? Second. Third time's a charm. So right now, when you folks permit conditional use solar facility, they get the standards that are in the zoning ordinance for the sizes of the plants to use from chapter 9.1.5. We send that to them. It says unless otherwise approved by staff, trees shall be balled and burlapped. In terms of resiliency and not removing parent soil, balled and burlapped as a condition is starting to decrease to keep tonnage of soil from disappearing for transferring things like nematodes and so on. So a lot of times really good quality container trees, like a 10, 15, 20 gallon tree is going to be an equivalency. So we keep that in mind. This is a typical, this is one of the recently permitted landscape plans. It's very, very tiny, but I'm just going to step over there for a minute too, because I think the pointer might be inadequate. But so there's, as you're coming up the road here, heading toward Apple Blossom or County 1, there are deciduous trees in a grove situation here. So the goal in this part of the landscaping through here was to continue that visually and to sort of distract the eye from glancing to the left by continuing deciduous trees along there where they have a wider space, and those trees are not going to impinge upon the south-facing slope and the solar panels' ability to do their work. As it tightens up and as the road comes along here, there's some evergreens starting to pop in. There's a group here, and then I'll duck a little bit here, but there's additional varieties of evergreen. So when we take a look at the plan, we do not want one kind of evergreen in their plan, because if a new species of woolly aphid shows up, or spider mites show up on spruce, spruce adelgid, there's diseases and insects of all sorts of things, and so you don't want something wiped out just like that, so you put 2 or 3 species in just to make sure that doesn't happen. Up in the corner, when people are going to be rounding the corner here as they're coming up the road to head up to Apple Blossom, that's a tighter group of white cedars or junipers, mid-sized evergreens, and there's less room there too. So we're trying to work with the folks that are producing the landscape plans to provide as few restrictions on their work and to be cost effective, and also do as much screening as we possibly can for glare and other things for the adjacent roadway where they are controlling the parcel. However, this is an example from County Road 114, Nathan Gibbs property. Midday solar glare, and depending on the angle of the hill or the angle of, or the height of where one might be viewing it, it is possible to get glare, even with landscaping that might be included. And something must also be said that when you put in the spec, which is the first slide I showed you, it takes a few years. Even a rather generous, 5'5", 5-foot evergreen still is going to take a while to get to a mature size to do its job screening. However, there might be situations where a full screening of the facility is either impossible, or it would require you. Here's a couple more shots, courtesy of Planning Commission member Clark. Thank you. Would require either easements on someone else's property, keeping in mind that the distance, how far away would you say this photograph is from the solar array?
That's a close one. That's probably 250 feet.
Okay. But might extend a quarter
Some
mile.
out that go back to a quarter mile.
Yeah.
Oh, it's over a quarter mile when you get to.
So, obviously, it wouldn't be desirable. Trying to keep in mind the view shed is one thing. The safety, though, of, passersby, people in vehicles and so on, as well as the enjoyment of one's own property, are factors that we try to look at too. But I'm not sure that every eventuality can be covered, but that's what we're currently doing, but without, the ability to create easements or to say, look, there's a concern because you're on a slope but a higher slope can see you, you're really kind of looking at individual parcels and trying to be thoughtful neighbors. The parcel owners would like the income. We want to make sure that we have positive results and not too many adverse effects. So that was just a quick little update on what some potential issues might be, but also what we are doing and how we develop the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we want to have Lou continue working on this? It's impossible for us to have this public hearing at the next meeting, right?
Right.
Or is,
Not if you want us to look at that ag piece that we've been talking about. We need to bring that back and draft something specifically for that, because that's not in the draft ordinance right now.
so is that agreeable, understandable by the members of the commission? Okay, we don't need any action then, right, council? Is that agreeable with everyone here? Or majority of those here? I see nods of approval, so, okay. That finishes this part. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Then we need what? The Board of Adjustment, and Kay is gonna fill in for the chairman and the vice chairman of the Board of Adjustment.
Thank you. The Board of Adjustment Chair, Cherie Hales, your liaison, is on vacation, and Assistant Chair Larry Graydon is enjoying his anniversary dinner tonight and charged me with giving the updates to docket BOA 815-1901, which was Richard and Linda Seidel. They received a variance to allow a seasonal dwelling with a garage between the toe and top of the bluff. They had a driveway and a flat site cut in before the zoning ordinance. And they needed, because it's a seasonal dwelling within 500 feet of a feedlot with a capacity for 10 to 50 animal units, and from one that was 1,000-foot setback from 50 animal units as well. They expressed, when the petitioner spoke, that they had both a letter from the feedlot owner of the 10 to 50 animal unit feedlot expressing their approval and support, and also they have a right of first refusal for that site where they plan to build a permanent home down below. Mrs. Seidel reiterated that this was just for hunting purposes, and it was passed. Randy Speltz asked for a variance to allow a 100-foot setback from 248 for building a structure. Instead of the required 130 feet, he was going to build, at first it was going to be a garage, and then he also said it might be a pavilion, but at any rate, it was deemed to be a modest-sized structure, and it was approved. Docket 815-1903, the third one, Mike Sherman, you saw the presentation yourself, and you also realized that he received his variance for the building site on Class 1 soil. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
So that's on a state highway, that Randy Speltz?
Correct.
So we have the authority over a state highway?
It's not in the right-of-way, it's just for the setback, so.
Setback from the right of way.
Right,
Okay. I know it's just a huge right of way there. It's unbelievable.
yeah. And the corner of his house actually kind of hits it too, and maybe some others in the area aren't compliant there. So this modest structure would be in line with the house.
Good.
So it wouldn't impinge into the actual right-of-way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner update?
Yeah, we approved the Ray Erke building on less than 40 acres, and we tabled the car lot for Jason Jacobson. And the reason we tabled it is because we had information that he might not be even pursuing it anymore, and we're gonna let staff go for an extension there and find out for sure what the petitioner's intentions are. We didn't want to approve it and make a permanent car lot there if the petitioner wasn't going to follow through on it. So that's where those are at.
Is there any other business, or I need a motion? Oh, yeah, Pat.
Item number 6 there, for those of you that went, was it a township?
Township officers.
Township officer.
Right? Yeah.
Was there any question, or what was your question about CUP and IUPs from any of those officers present there? As far as having a good handle, knowing the difference between the two? Did you get any?
We didn't discuss CUPs, IUPs. We discussed their request that.
For notification.
Right. But that didn't come up at all, or any,
I did make a presentation to them a few months back.
Okay.
Before the planning commission was heavy into talking about it.
Okay.
And it generated some discussion, but not lots of concerns, as I recall, and Commissioner Jacob was at all those meetings too.
Okay. I guess from that meeting, you didn't, it didn't kind of come up, we need a little clarification with it. They seemed like they had a good handle on the difference between those two.
I think so.
Okay, okay. We're just curious about that. Thank you. All right, I need a motion. So move.
Second.
Okay, Pat moved that we adjourn. Mark seconded it. All those in favor of adjourning the August meeting of the Winona County Planning Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your attendance.